I wanted to call out one of the best openings of a book I've ever seen. You want to get people hooked and interested and curious, and also get like the whole idea of the book in like the first paragraph. That's a lot of work to put into a paragraph, right? If you can get all of that done in one paragraph, you probably have a good book. If you're good at your job, you have all kinds of leverage with your boss. All kinds of leverage. But nobody in their, let's say in their 20s, just to pick a time range, nobody in their 20s knows that. They don't know that yet. You don't really know that until you become the boss. Let's talk about LeBron. Before you say, Scott, you're just dunking on an athlete and you're telling him to basically stay in his lane. And don't you, Scott, tell us all the time that that's the worst advice ever? Telling people to stay in their lane? Because that's what this soccer star told LeBron, stick to sports. You've seen me criticize that, right? A lot of times. Well, let me tell you when people should leave their lane and when they should not. Well, I promised you that I would, in addition to informing you, that I would make you smarter every time you watch my live stream. In other words, I'll tell you something that maybe you hadn't heard before that would be useful, or maybe reinforce something that you already knew, but it helps to have it reinforced. And let me start with this. Dana Perino has a new book called Everything Will Be Okay, The Life Lessons for Young Women. I got an advanced copy. And I guess it goes on sale in early March. So you can pre-order it now. And here's what I want to give you for your lesson for the day. Have I told you that writing it's really important to start out right. And this book, Dana's book, I haven't read the whole book, but I wanted to call out one of the best openings of a book I've ever seen. So I've told you many times, if you followed my writing advice, that you should write and rewrite the opening of your book, the first few sentences. You should just rewrite that 100 times. No matter how many times you rewrite it, you could probably make it a little better. And you want to get people hooked and interested and curious, and also get like the whole idea of the book in like the first paragraph. That's a lot of work to put into a paragraph, right? If you can get all of that done in one paragraph, you probably have a good book. Let me read the opening from Dana's book to see how to do this right. Introduction. So I got a call from a young woman in Washington, D.C. seeking some advice. She had a problem at work and was quite upset. Her office supervisor wanted her to do something that she was very uncomfortable with, make a public statement under her own name using language and a tone that she thought was disrespectful and unproductive. And then I guess she said on the phone, Dana advised her, then don't say it. Absolutely do not do it. I said. Quote, I don't think I can refuse, she said. She was afraid she'd be fired if she didn't comply, that she didn't have the gravitas to decline. Quote, I'm not Dana Perino, she said. And then Dana Perino responded, quote, well, how do you think I became Dana Perino? How do you think I became Dana Perino? That's one of the best openings of a book that you'll ever see. That, by the way, that advice is worth the price of the book. Just that advice. And you got it in the first paragraph. And let me add to that. One of the pieces of advice I give more than just about any other piece of advice is that when people get in some kind of a negotiation, usually somebody wants a job or they're trying to get a deal, or in this case, somebody's negotiating with their boss, potentially. In all of those cases, people who are low ranking imagine that they don't have any leverage. And that's an illusion. It's a complete illusion. You have lots of leverage if you're an employee, even if you have a boss. Because your boss doesn't want to hire a new employee. Your boss really, really, really doesn't want to have to get rid of you and find a new employee. That's like one of the worst things a boss has to do. It's just hard. I mean, everything gets wrecked if you have to go find a new employee. So if you're good at your job, you have all kinds of leverage with your boss. All kinds of leverage. But nobody in their, let's say in their 20s, just to pick a time range, nobody in their 20s knows that. They don't know that yet. You don't really know that until you become the boss. Once you become a boss, then you realize how much leverage your employees have, because you really need them, right? You don't have an option where the employees don't exist or don't do good work and you're still a star. So you always have more leverage than you think. That is some of the best advice you'll ever hear. All right, now this assumes that you do good work, right? If you're bad at your job, you don't have any leverage, right? It's only if you're good at your job. Let's talk about LeBron. He's my favorite big dumb guy. And somebody will turn that into something racial, right? You can be dumb of any ethnicity, can't you? I'm pretty sure. I've seen big dumb guys of every ethnic group. So keep it in context. Another athlete, a major soccer star, is Zlatan Ibrahimovic, criticized LeBron for being political. LeBron responded by saying that he does his homework. So he's not just a big dumb athlete, he does his homework. He digs in. And after doing his homework, he had concluded, at least in the past, that he believes the Fine People hoax really happened. Glad he did his homework. He couldn't even tell that the biggest hoax in the country never happened. So that's what he got when he did his homework. I also wonder, what exactly is LeBron's take on Generation 4 nuclear power? Does he see that as a key variable in the climate change topic? He probably doesn't know what it is. And if you don't know what Generation 4 nuclear is, do you know much about climate change and what to do about it and what the options are and what energy is really green and what is really dangerous? Probably not. So how much research is LeBron doing? Now, before you say, Scott, you're just dunking on an athlete and you're telling him to basically stay in his lane. And don't you, Scott, tell us all the time that that's the worst advice ever? Telling people to stay in their lane? Because that's what this soccer star told LeBron, stick to sports. You've seen me criticize that, right? A lot of times. Well, let me tell you when people should leave their lane and when they should not. It's just a general rule. There could be some exceptions, but as a general rule, if you're in the top 1% of people who are brilliant and effective, leave your lane. Leave your lane. Because Elon Musk had never sent a rocket to Mars, but I feel like he can figure it out because he's in the top 1%. Elon Musk had never built an electric car, but he figured it out because he's in the top 1%. Bill Gates had never started a major company, but he's in the top 1% of intelligence and capability, so he figured it out. If you're not in the top 1%, well, then it gets a little bit more of a gray area, doesn't it? I don't think everybody should change their lane, right? Not everybody should change their lane. But I'll give you another example. I think it was Mark Dice was tweeting about how Bill Gates is making medical, I wouldn't say recommendations, but he's making a lot of statements in the medical field that you'd sort of expect a virologist or a doctor to be making, right? And so the criticism is, hey, Bill Gates, you know, you're good with software and running companies, but why don't you leave the medical stuff to the medical people? Is that good advice? Nope, it's not. Now, I see people believe the conspiracy theories about Bill Gates being evil and he's going to put a chip in you and all that. That's all ridiculous, by the way. It's all ridiculous. But it's a different topic. The question is, if you saw Bill Gates disagreeing with some doctors on the question of the pandemic, who should you trust? Would you trust Bill Gates, his opinion on the pandemic, or a doctor? Now, let's say that the doctor is a GP, general practitioner, very skilled at doctoring. Maybe not a virologist, but a doctor. Bill Gates is not a doctor. Let's say they had different opinions. Who would you trust? The doctor, to have a medical opinion, or Bill Gates, not a doctor? Who would you trust? If you trust the doctor, it's a sucker's play. I would trust Bill Gates every fucking time. All right? If you're making this mistake, then you don't understand what it means to be in the top 1%. All right? I say this not as an insult to anybody watching this, all right? Not as an insult. Your dog doesn't understand how you turn on the lights. Would you agree? Your dog knows the lights often come on when you enter the room, but doesn't quite understand that it's something you do with the light switch, or maybe you talk to your digital assistant or something. The dog just knows the lights come on. A dog cannot understand a human with an IQ of, let's say, 100, average. A dog has no idea why that person makes those decisions, but would you say that a person with average intelligence, a human, would make better decisions than, say, a dog? Not about dog things, but about human things. And the answer is yes. Not only would you guarantee that a person with an IQ of 100 would nail it better than a dog at making decisions for humans, but you know the dog doesn't get it. The dog wouldn't know that the human is that much smarter, but the human knows for sure that the dog is that much dumber. It's not a two-way awareness. It's a one-way awareness. The smart person knows, the dog doesn't. Now take that to humans. Let's say you're pretty smart. You got an IQ of 120, 130, pretty good IQ. You are not in the same range as Bill Gates. You're not even close. You're not even close. You're as close to Bill Gates in intelligence if you have like a 120, 130. You're not that far off from the dog to a person who have normal intelligence. You have no idea how his brain works, how effective it is, the things he can do with his brain that you just can't. And by the way, I put myself in that category of somebody who's substantially less intelligent than Bill Gates. When Bill Gates looks into a topic, I would go with him. Now, what you don't see is Bill Gates necessarily saying something different than the top virologists. That's different, right? The top virologists, like in the world, are probably also in the top 1%, and they also know their topic. But on top of that, and so I would listen to those, and I think Bill Gates does as well. But if you were comparing Bill Gates to your family doctor, and they had different opinions, I would take Bill Gates every time over your family general practitioner, if they were different. Now, I don't know if there's any case that they ever would be different. I'm just saying that you can't judge LeBron leaving his lane with Bill Gates leaving his lane. They are not even a little bit similar. So that's the next thing that you learned today. Leaving your lane is good for the people who can do it, and most people can't. Let me give you another example. Some years ago, the CEO of Intel, who was Andy Grove, I think he's passed, but Andy Grove wrote a very long article, I think it was for Forbes or Fortune or something. It was one of those magazines. And what he did was he had prostate cancer. Now, Andy Grove was an engineer. Would you trust an engineer to give you advice on prostate cancer? Well, your first impression should be no, right? Why would you trust an engineer to give you medical advice? But the reason it was a major article that really made an impact, I think, in the country, is that Andy Grove did what the doctors couldn't do. He looked at all the research, and then he put it in context, and then he explained it to the public, so anybody who was in the same situation, had prostate cancer, could see all of their surgical and other options in the clearest possible way for the first time. For the first time. Why did Andy Grove have to write an article about prostate cancer? Because there wasn't anybody who could tell him. There were no doctors who knew what Andy Grove knew when he was done doing the research. None of them. They probably knew what they knew, more than he did, but they didn't see the whole field. He did. And when he wrote it, doctors said, all right, that's a real service. That's a real service. Because even we're not seeing it, in that detail. So, would you trust Andy Grove to make a medical recommendation? In that case, in that specific case, yes, I would trust him over the doctors. I would listen to both, of course, but don't count out the top 1%ers. They're just not like other people.